Once a staple of the British mainline network, the Class 47, originally known as the Brush Type 4, was built between 1962 and 1968 as an answer to the question of providing more powerful locomotives within a highly restricted weight limitation, with 512 units being built by Brush at Loughborough and by British Railways at Crewe, making it the most numerous British mainline diesel class, and will become a true mixed-traffic workhorse, hauling everything from express passenger trains to heavy freight across all regions. The story of the Class 47 begins during a period when British Railways was trying to force a clean break with steam, but was still wrestling with what modern traction ought to look like in practice, with the British Transport Commission, or BTC, by the end of the 1950s, having publicly fixed on the removal of steam locomotives from mainline British Railways by 1968, and if steam was to be swept away on time, the company needed a large number of powerful mainline diesels quickly, and it needed them in a form that could run across a network whose routes, bridges, track, and civil engineering standards did not all welcome heavy locomotives. British Railways already had successful Type 4 era thinking in embryo, but it was trapped between competing lessons, with early mainline diesels of roughly the 2,000 horsepower category, such as the English Electric Type 4, later Class 40, and the Derby-built Peaks that emerged as Classes 44 to 46, having shown that the diesel-electric concept could work well in British conditions, settling down as reliable designs, but also revealing that the cost of their robustness was paid in exceptional weight. The civil engineers' concern about axle loads had pushed designers towards very substantial underframes and bogie arrangements, intended to spread the weight, but despite this, these early diesels were still immense machines, and a significant portion of their power went into moving their own mass rather than the train behind them, and if British Railways was going to buy hundreds of locomotives, those inefficiencies could not be ignored. At the same time, diesel locomotive design was moving quickly, and one of the most significant shifts was structural, with the concept of a separate load-bearing chassis being superseded by a stressed-skin, stress-bearing body, which offered the possibility of a lighter locomotive for a given power output, and it also promised a more compact machine, better suited to British loading constraints. On top of that, component design was improving, and British Railways had growing confidence in the direction of electrical equipment development, with later versions of the Derby Peaks being fitted with Brush electrical equipment, which was showing advantages over earlier Crompton-Parkinson arrangements. By the early 1960s, the need for a new standard design had become obvious, and the British Transport Commission set out to define it formally, with February 1960 seeing the announcement that the BTC was seeking a new locomotive design and issued a technical specification, which aimed at a locomotive more powerful than earlier types of around 2,500 horsepower, but crucially it required that this higher power should be carried on two six-wheel bogies without any substantial increase in axle loading. Essentially, British Railways needed a Type 4 that could go almost anywhere a major express or heavy freight locomotive would be expected to go, rather than a powerful machine restricted by weight, and the BTC stated requirement for an axle load of no more than 19 long tons framed the entire exercise, though the question remained as to how to get a large, light enough, powerful enough Type 4 into production fast. As part of this process, prospective manufacturers responded with designs that tried to marry British Railways' need to their own engineering philosophies and commercial hopes, with three prominent prototype strands coming in the form of Brush's D0280 Falcon, D0260 Lion, which was the product of a joint venture between the Birmingham Railway Carriage and Wagon Company, Associated Electrical Industries and Sulzer, and English Electric's DP2 concept. The BRCW AEI Sulzer Consortium offered a production version of Lion, a prototype then under construction, and importantly it proposed both steam and electric heating, while Brush, for its part, offered three options: a production version of Falcon, or a single-engine design using either a Sulzer engine or the English Electric 16 CSVT, with steam heating and an option for electric heating, while the North British Locomotive Company offered a Sulzer-powered design with both steam and electric heating. On paper, the BRCW AEI Sulzer bid was preferred, with the Sulzer power being attractive, the electrical equipment being increasingly understood, and the train heating flexibility meaning it could be compatible with both older steam-heated stock and the emerging electric train heating technology, though due to the BTC's tight schedule, together with BRCW's own financial problems, the general consensus was that the company could not fulfill a large order. Meanwhile, British Railways had begun pursuing the Derby-built Type 4 programme, and within that program, Brush electrical equipment had been specified for later peak variants, with the BTC therefore adopting a pragmatic, even radical approach by cancelling the final order of 20 Class 46 locomotives and instead inviting bids for 20 locomotives of the new Type 4 specification, using the Brush electrical equipment intended for the cancelled Class 46 order. Brush ultimately won the contract, and in a single move, British Railways freed up equipment, avoided waiting for an entirely new supply chain to bed in, and created a short initial production run that could be put into traffic and evaluated while the wider fleet decision was effectively being made in parallel, while at the same time, the BTC was not convinced that the future of diesel traction lay down the hydraulic transmission path on the Western region and wished to concentrate on diesel-electric designs. Despite the Western region's hydraulics being formidable machines, standardization would be the theme of the Brush Type 4's conception, being a locomotive that could roam between regions, replace steam on express duties, and handle freight as required in a manner that would allow British Railways to simplify operations and accelerate steam withdrawal. And the first batch, ordered on February 28, 1961, as D1500 to D1519, embodied this push for rapid, practical capability. These would be mechanically different from the remainder of the class, using Westinghouse-supplied brake systems, while also being fitted with both steam heating boilers and electric train heating equipment, the latter derived from the locomotive's DC generator, and central to the design was the Sulzer 12 LDA 28C engine, a twin-bank 12-cylinder power unit developing 2,750 horsepower at 750 RPM. This represented a 10% increase over the earlier 12 LDA-28 variants, achieved through higher permissible engine speeds, improved intercooling, and strengthened internal components such as connecting rods, with the engine driving a brush main generator supplying 6 traction motors, 1 per axle, mounted on 2 3-axle bogies, while the adoption of a stress-skinned body structure eliminated the need for a heavy underframe, reducing the overall weight to approximately 117 tons, a significant saving compared with the earlier Type 4s, and shortening the locomotive by around 4 feet. Styling reflected contemporary thinking, with the flat-fronted cab ends incorporating a 4-character headcode display beneath the windscreens, dispensing with the earlier split-box arrangement, while ventilation grills were positioned high at cantrail level, giving the body sides a cleaner appearance, and the two-tone green livery applied to early examples enhanced this modern look and helped to soften the visual bulk of the slab sides, while internally, the layout was arranged for ease of maintenance with modular electrical cubicles and improved access to engine components. D1500, the first completed locomotive, entered traffic in November 1962 and underwent extensive dynamometer trials, and on the Western region's Devon banks, it restarted a 571-ton train on a 1 in 38 gradient, a demanding demonstration of adhesion and tractive effort, while on the East Coast Main Line it hauled a 385-ton train between London and Doncaster in 2 hours and 20 minutes, while freight trials around Scunthorpe included 1,500-ton steel trains. Even before the pilot batch had fully proved itself, confidence in the concept led to further orders, and on January 1, 1962, a second batch, D1520 to D1681, was authorized, while subsequent orders followed on September 4, 1962 for D1682 to D1706, and on September 28 of the same year for D1707 to D1781. With the final total eventually reaching 512 locomotives, built between 1962 and 1968, making the Class 47 the most numerous British mainline diesel locomotive class, with 310 being constructed by Brush at Falcon Works Loughborough, while 202 were assembled at British Railways Crew Works using Brush-supplied equipment. Although outwardly similar, early production locomotives displayed variations, with most being fitted with steam heating boilers for passenger work, though a batch of 81 locomotives, principally D1782 to D1836 and D1875 to D1900, were built without any train heating equipment and were intended primarily for freight, while all locomotives were vacuum braked from new, with air train braking equipment fitted to later examples and retrofitted to earlier ones as they passed through works, and traction motor connections varied, with some locomotives wired for series parallel operation and others for all parallel. From 1962 onward, the class spread rapidly, with the earliest examples being allocated to the eastern region, particularly the East Coast Main Line, though deliveries soon supplied the Western, London Midland and Scottish regions, the urgency to get examples into mainline service being so great that some units entered regular traffic still wearing pink undercoat until such time that depots could apply the standard BR two-tone green. Brush Type 4s display steam on high-profile passenger duties, appearing on services such as the Tees Tyne Pullman and major Anglo-Scottish expresses, while also taking on freight diagrams ranging from pick-up goods to heavy coal and steel traffic. But despite the class proving to be broadly reliable, some units developed fatigue cracks and other issues under heavy use. Bogie fires and traction motor failures occurred in isolated cases, and in response, British Railways implemented a programme of modifications, and during the mid-1960s, the decision was taken to derate the fleet from 2,750 horsepower to 2,580, with this reduction alleviating mechanical stresses and significantly improving reliability without materially affecting performance, and by 1966, the locomotives had largely settled into dependable service across the network. A notable divergence within the build occurred with 5 locomotives, D1702 to D1706, as delivered between September 1965 and July 1966, which were fitted with the Sulzer V12 12 LVA24 engine, rated at 2,650 horsepower, and were classified separately as Class 48, these locomotives being based mainly at Tinsley, where they worked both freight and passenger services, later transferring to Norwich in 1969 for express work between Norwich and London Liverpool Street. This experiment, however, proved unsuccessful, with the 12 LVA24 engine suffering frequent failures and high maintenance costs, and in 1969, British Rail decided to abandon the experiment, with D1702 being rebuilt at Crewe Works using components salvaged from D1908, which had been withdrawn after a serious collision at Monmore Green in April 1969, with D1702 returning to traffic in December of that year with the standard 12 LDA28 engine, and the remaining 4 were converted by early 1971, with the removed engines being sold to SNCF for use in their Class A1A 68,000 locomotives. The Brush Type 4 was also the spearhead of British Railways' new corporate direction during the mid-1960s with the XB64 concept, a full corporate refresh that brought about the introduction of the Rail Blue livery that would define the next 20 years, with newly built example D1733 being outshopped in an experimental light blue livery with red cap side panels, and would be lashed up with 8 coaches that would form the basis of the future Mark II carriage, with D1733 wearing this unique livery until December 1969, at which point it adopted the standard monostraw blue. By May 1968, the final example, D1961, entered service, bringing the total to 512 locomotives, with the first 500 being numbered consecutively D1500 to D1999, while the last 12 carried the numbers D1100 to D1111, and by the close of 1969, the Brush Type 4 had become a ubiquitous presence across Britain's railways, hauling principal expresses on both the east and west coast main lines, operating cross-country services, and handling a wide spectrum of freight duties. During the 1970s, the introduction of the Computerized Total Operations Processing System, or TOPS, required a comprehensive renumbering scheme, and the Brush Type 4 became the Class 47, with the basic steam-heated locomotives, originally numbered D1520 to D1781, D1837 to 1874, D1901 to 1959, D1962 to D1999, and D1100, becoming 47001 to 47298, while the freight-only variants, originally numbered D1782 to 1836 and D1875 to D1900, would become 47301 to 381. Alongside them were the electric train heating fitted locomotives, which under TOPS were grouped as Class 47/4, of which only 22 locomotives have been built with electrical heating from new, namely the first batch D1500 to D1519, and the later pair D1960 and D1961. Though as electrically heated coaching stock proliferated in the late 1960s and early 1970s, British Rail embarked on a substantial programme to retrofit ETH equipment. By the time of the renumbering, around 112 additional locomotives have been converted, some retaining steam heating boilers in parallel for a period, with the 47/4 subclass soon settling at 154 locomotives numbered 47401 to 47547 and 47549 to 47555, and further conversions from 47/0 followed during the decade, pushing numbers higher, while the change from vacuum-braked, steam-heated trains to air-braked, electrically heated stock drove much of the class's evolution into a standard heavy diesel locomotive. In March 1974, the geographical spread of the class illustrated its national importance, with 41 allocated to Bristol Bath Road, 51 to Bescot, 80 to Crewe Diesel Depot, 53 to Cardiff Canton, 3 to Cricklewood, 12 to Finsbury Park, 28 to Gateshead, 8 to Haymarket, 11 to Holbeck, 41 to Immingham, 1 to Inverness, 10 to Nottingley, 27 to Landor, 24 to Old Oak Common, 30 to Stratford, 11 to Thornaby, 48 to Tinsley, 21 to Towton, and 8 to York. After being severely damaged at a derailment near Peterborough, locomotive 47046 was selected as a test bed for the projected Class 56 heavy freight locomotive, being fitted with a 16-cylinder Ruston 16RK3CT engine rated at 3,250 horsepower and was renumbered 47601, while in 1979, the same locomotive was repurposed for the Class 58 project, fitted with a 12-cylinder Ruston engine rated at 3,300 horsepower and renumbered 47901. Operational oddities also occurred, and in 1976, 47155 was removed from its bogies and installed at West Thurrock Power Station as a stationary generator while problems with one of the plant's auxiliary generators was investigated, with the locomotive being mounted on a heavy timber frame. The latter part of the decade also saw further significant development, with British Rail identifying a need to improve the aging Glasgow to Edinburgh shuttle services, then operated by pairs of Class 27s in top and tail mode, and to increase speed and reliability, 12 Class 47/4 locomotives were selected for conversion to push-pull operation using TDM equipment and fitted with long-range fuel tanks. These would become the Class 47/7, numbered 47701 to 716, with these conversions beginning in 1979 and would be supported by the conversion of 14 Mark II-F brake standard open or BSO coaches into cab control cars dubbed driving brake standard open or DBSO, which would be positioned at the Glasgow end of each train, while in 1985 the push-pull concept was extended from Glasgow to Aberdeen and the subclass was enlarged accordingly. However, this arrangement was not without controversy, as on July 30, 1984, locomotive 47707 Holyrood, propelling the 1730 Edinburgh to Glasgow service from the rear, struck a cow near Polmont, causing a derailment that killed 13 people, with much of the scrutiny landing on the lightweight construction of the DBSO, which had made it so easy to run off the rails by the cow's carcass, and would ultimately lead to restrictions on accommodating passenger seating in the lead vehicle of trains operating at over 100 miles an hour for years to come. Operationally, the 1980s saw the Class 47 fleet deeply embedded across all regions, and as British Rail reorganised into business sectors such as Intercity, Rail Freight and Network South East, the 47s were allocated according to traffic needs rather than historical regional boundaries, with Intercity relying heavily on ETH-fitted 47/4s, especially on cross-country routes linking the northeast and northwest with the south coast and southwest, while Rail Freight continued to draw on the 47/0 and /3 fleets for bulk and general merchandise traffic. The problem of fuel range on long cross-country diagrams became increasingly apparent during this period, and the abolition of traditional regional locomotive changes meant that locomotives could run from the northeast to the southwest without relief, sometimes arriving low on fuel. And in order to address this, the final 15 47/4 conversions, numbers 47650 to 665, were outshopped with additional fuel tanks, increasing capacity from 850 to 1,220 gallons by using space formerly occupied by boiler water tanks, with the success of this experiment leading to further conversions, and in 1989 these extended range machines were renumbered into the Class 47/8 series from 47801 upwards. At the start of the 1990s, the Class 47 fleet was still numerically strong, and by the end of 1992 only 61 locomotives had been withdrawn, though the arrival of new sprinter units for regional passenger services and more modern freight locomotives such as the Class 58, 59 and 60 would steadily erode the diagrams that had sustained the class for 3 decades, while spare parts were becoming harder to source, and in a fleet that included locomotives with differing electrical equipment, brake arrangements and heating systems, standardization increasingly mattered. The first targets for systematic withdrawal were the original pilot batch of 47401 to 420, with their Westinghouse brake equipment being regarded as non-standard, with 3 being withdrawn as life expired in February 1986, and the remainder following over the next few years, with all being out of service by 1992. While alongside these withdrawals, British Rail drew up what became informally known as a hit list, concentrating on locomotives with non-standard series parallel electrical equipment. This position altered as the decade progressed, and as new traction types arrived in greater numbers and the restructuring of British Rail under sectorisation placed sharper financial scrutiny on locomotive fleets, the intercity, rail freight, regional railways and parcel sectors each examined their requirements, and as more modern locomotives entered service, withdrawals accelerated, with the period between 1992 and 1995 seeing a further 86 Class 47s taken out of service. In terms of diagrams, one of the most notable changes came in Scotland, where following the arrival of Class 158 Express Sprinter units, push-pull services with Class 47s and DBSOs were withdrawn gradually between autumn 1989 and June 1990, though the DBSOs would find further work during May 1990 when they were employed by the intercity sector on the Great Eastern Main Line out of London Liverpool Street to Norwich and Ipswich, in combination with Class 86 electrics. As for the former ScotRail Class 47/7s, these were transferred to the Network South East sector to replace aging Class 50s on diagrams out of London Paddington to Oxford and on services out of London Waterloo to Salisbury, Exeter and Plymouth, though the stop-start nature of this route would wreak havoc on their mechanics, and reliability on the West of England route became especially poor, as compounded by large sections of the route being reduced to single track, with these trains eventually being replaced by Class 165 turbo units for the former and Class 159 units for the latter. Similarly, the Class 47, which had been a mainstay of the Trans-Pennine Express service for over 20 years, would find themselves being replaced rapidly by Class 155, 156 and 158 Sprinter units during the late 1980s, with the last Class 47 hauled diagrams on the Liverpool Lime Street to Newcastle and York corridor being withdrawn on January 20, 1991, with the final train being the 1822 Newcastle to Liverpool, as hauled by 47443 Northeastern, which was substantially delayed due to a major power failure affecting signalling near Durham and Huddersfield. Elsewhere, the parcels sector, rebranded from October 1991 as Rail Express Systems, employed between 60 and 70 Class 47/7s, which themselves were former Class 47/4s fitted with longer-range fuel tanks, for the widespread mail train operations across the British rail network. While as part of the £150 million RailNet project, these units were further modified with a limited push-pull capability to coincide with the introduction of propelling controlled vehicles or PCVs. The PCVs had been converted from 42 former driving trailers from the Class 307, a Great Eastern Main Line electric multiple unit from 1956, though the push-pull capability of the PCVs was not a true remote control system like that used on passenger trains, such as the DBSOs or the driving van trailers of the West and East Coast Main Lines, but instead functioned as a propelling advisory control system or PACS, with the PCV system requiring two drivers, one in the PCV at the leading end and one in the locomotive at the rear. The driver in the PCV selected the power level, which was transmitted via RCH or Railway Clearinghouse jumper cables to the locomotive, while inside the locomotive cab, a display unit showed the requested power level using a series of yellow bars ranging from 1 to 4, and the locomotive driver would then manually move their controller to match this request, while unlike the throttle, the train brakes were under the direct control of the driver in the PCV. PCVs, which usually formed semi-permanently coupled sets of 4 coaches, would be used to help mail trains be shunted into and out of the various mail-on-rail terminals, such as the Willesden RailNet terminal, and into and out of mainline termini, and though a train with a PCV could be hauled at up to 100 miles an hour, it was restricted to a maximum propelling speed of 40 miles an hour. The Class 47/8 subclass, meanwhile, were the backbone of high-mileage diagrams on the cross-country network, despite the presence of high-speed train sets, being employed on services from northern England and Scotland to Devon and Cornwall, as well as to Southampton, Portsmouth and Brighton, with the latter service being routed via the West London line at Kensington Olympia. In the freight role, the Class 47 entered the 1990s as the main power behind the Speedlink service during its final years of operation, while in Freightliner service, these locomotives formed the basis of container traffic across the non-electrified network, with approximately 40 to 50 Class 47s being routinely allocated to Freightliner duties as operated by Rail Freight Distribution. Similarly, Class 47s would provide the backbone for initial Channel Tunnel operations between Wembley Train Yard in London and Dollond's Moor Yard on the English side of the Channel, with these locomotives being used to provide an interim haulage measure due to delays in delivering the dedicated Class 92 electric locomotives during the mid-1990s, with Class 47s on these high-priority duties being usually worked in pairs for reasons of reliability and stringent timekeeping, maintaining future Class 92 diagrams that could weave through the densely trafficked South London commuter belt. It was during this period that Class 47s also gained numerous unique liveries, examples including 47475, which was the only Class 47 to ever wear the provincial livery of two-tone blue and white during 1989, though the locomotive stripes did not match up with those of the regular coaching stock, leading to a notable lack of symmetry, while 47145 Meriden Emrys of Tinsley Depot wore a unique BR blue livery with Rail Freight General and later Rail Freight Distribution sector decals. During the mid-1990s, privatisation would see most of the 47/8s transferred to Virgin Cross Country, where they continued to haul trains across long-distance routes, while during 1993, 47364 was renumbered 47981 for use on test trains out of Derby, and two locomotives belonging to the Res sector, 47798 Prince William and 47799 Prince Henry, were dedicated to Royal Train duties from 1995 and classified as 47/7C, replacing two former intercity locomotives, 47834 Firefly and 47835 Windsor Castle, which had been primarily nominated from 1990. Under Great Western Trains, Class 47/8s, 47811, 813, 815, 816, 830, 832 and 846 were employed on daytime trains out of London Paddington to Plymouth and Penzance, as well as the Night Riviera sleeper from London to Penzance, which also incorporated a revived motor rail service, with these locomotives continuing in service following the creation of First Great Western in 1998 and were based at Aldo Common and Penzance Longrock. However, the most significant change in Class 47 operations during the 1990s came with the conversion of several examples into what would become the Class 57, with November 1997 seeing the recently privatised freight operator Freightliner place an order for the re-engineering of its Class 47 fleet with a reconditioned electromotive diesel 645 series prime mover and a reworked Class 56 alternator, following increasing reliability concerns with their existing fleet. At a cost of £300,000 per locomotive, this work was undertaken at Brush Traction in Loughborough, with the first Class 57, 57001 Freightliner Pioneer, formerly 47356, being unveiled in July 1998, with the initial batch of 6 units being followed by a further 6, though Freightliner's wider order for 25 examples would be curtailed, following the company's order for an initial batch of 5 Class 66 locomotives built in North America, which would ultimately expand to 20 units following the success of the class with EWS. Based on the success of the Class 57s with Freightliner, leasing company Porterbrook experimented with applying the same technology for passenger operations, with 47825 being converted into 57601 using the same general principles, but with electric train heating incorporated and a revised light cluster arrangement, with the locomotive being unveiled on March 26, 2001, before being leased by First Great Western in June of the same year for daytime loco haul diagrams between London, Plymouth and Penzance. Following its successful application, 4 additional Class 47s were converted to Class 57 specification, though these differed from 57601 through the use of a more powerful F3B version of the END engine to better handle the power demands of passenger train supply or ETS, with 57601 being returned to Porterbrook due to its non-standard nature and would eventually find work with West Coast Railways and charter duty. Further passenger versions of the Class 57 would follow in June 2002, when Virgin Trains initially ordered its Class 57s as a potential means of replacing Class 47s on loco haul diagrams and to work as rescue locomotives or Thunderbirds, though with the arrival of Class 390 Pendolino Electrics and Class 220 and 221 Voyager units, the initial batch were modified with the fitting of retractable Delner couplings into their cab fronts. Eventually, 16 Class 47s were converted to Class 57 configuration for Virgin Trains, with each one bearing the name of characters from the classic 1960s British television show Thunderbirds, including the 5 Tracy brothers, Jeff Tracy, Lady Penelope, Tintin, Brains, Carano, Parker and the Hood, as well as Tracy Island, and the Thunderbirds vehicles Firefly, the Mole and Fab 1. The Virgin Trains Class 57s also working on passenger diagrams, where they would drag Class 390 Pendolinos from Crewe to Holyhead along the North Wales coastline. As for the Class 47s, Virgin's strategy to replace locomotive-hauled trains with new Bombardier Class 220 and 221 Voyager diesel multiple units meant that by 2001, with deliveries of the new traction beginning, the Class 47/8s would be removed from service, and thus, to commemorate their impending withdrawal, leasing company Porterbrook from November 2001 had 5 engines repainted into heritage or celebrity colours. 47847 emerged in British Rail Large Logo Blue alongside 47851 in British Railways Two-Tone Green, while 47853 appeared in the experimental XP64 livery it had first appeared in during 1964, and 47826 regained its Intercity Swallow scheme, while in March 2002, 47829 appeared in a striking jam sandwich police livery to promote the British Transport Police campaigns against trespass and vandalism, and in May 2002, 47840 was turned out in a version of standard BR Blue with small logos and was named North Star. Eventually, on August 19, 2002, after operating the final Virgin cross-country loco hauled service, these 5 Celebrity engines would be lined up at Toton Traction Maintenance Depot to mark the transition of operations from Class 47s to Virgin Voyagers, while First Great Western continued to operate daytime loco hauled services with Class 47s until December 11, 2004, while the Night Riviera Sleeper was transferred to Class 57 operation, as it remains to this day. On mail trains, despite the arrival of Class 67s in 2000 to replace Class 47s working for EWS, these locomotives continued to see action on mail diagrams until the contract between EWS and Royal Mail ended in January 2004, with Class 47s being held in tactical reserve by the company until April of the same year, after which they were formally withdrawn, while for Freightliner, Class 47s worked alongside Class 57s until the latter were withdrawn in January 2011. Though one Class 47 would remain with the company until July 2024, that being 47-830, which was renamed Beeching's Legacy, to mark 50 years since the first container train ran under British Rail. As of July 2024, 76 locomotives still existed as Class 47s, with 32 having been preserved, and 31 locomotives, including 6 preserved examples, retaining mainline running certificates, with the mainline registered fleet in early 2023, including locomotives with Nemesis Rail, GB Rail Freight, Locomotive Services Limited, and West Coast Railways, alongside preserved engines such as 47270, 47580, 47712, 47773, 47799, and 47828, all certified for mainline use. West Coast Railways remains the largest operator, though it began scrapping stored locomotives in January 2023, while as for the Class 57s, Great Western Railway continued to operate their fleet of Class 57s on Night Riviera sleeper trains, while Virgin Trains' fleet of Class 57/3s were withdrawn in December 2012 and dispatched to various operators including Network Rail, Arriva Trains Wales, DRS and GB Rail Freight, and Freightliner's Class 57/0s would find work with Locomotive Services Limited and West Coast Railways. In the end, the Class 47's significance in modernising Britain's railways cannot be understated, with its sheer usefulness of being conceived as a lighter, go-anywhere Type 4 to speed steam's replacement that was built in huge numbers and proven across every region on everything from top expresses to heavy freight, making it the default answer to countless operating problems for decades, leaving behind a legacy of pragmatic design, hard work, and an enduring place in Britain's railway memory.